would have participated in the virtual property show on Friday and Saturday. And I want to hear from you. How did you find the virtual property show? What were some of the key, sessions that you attended? And what are some of the things that you learned when you attended the virtual property show? It was quite an exciting show. If you've missed it, where have you been? We've been talking about the show for the past couple of weeks. We've certainly been excited to bring you the virtual property show. We were, of course, going to, have it across the various cities, your Cape Town, Joburg, Durban. But then COVID hit our shores, and we had to, be innovative and still make sure that we bring you the best property insights, best experts to help us navigate our property journey, regardless of whether you're a property investor, you're a renter, you're a seller, you're a buyer. It really was the kind of show that everybody at home could attend from the comfort of their homes. If somehow you've missed it, then please do go back to, the sessions and I think catch up with it. I think one of the very best things is that it's such an informative, show, and there were so many great nuggets from the show. Do share with us down here below. What were some of the big nuggets that you picked up while attending the virtual property show? I want to hear from you. You can, of course, also tweet us to tell us what, those nuggets were. We were, of course, using that hashtag VPS 2020. I want to hear, what were some of those big nuggets that you learned along the journey, certainly as you were participating in the virtual property show. You can also tweet me on @Zamantungwa_K. And of course, that brings us to the Monday edition of the Private Property Podcast. And we've got somebody who we actually had just last week. And I mean, him and I were actually, laughing off stage that we've been doing this together so much that I should probably bring him on to co-host. He must almost have like a regular slot with us here on the Private Property Podcast. And that's, of course, Daniel van der Merwe, who is, the architect, who's the director and the practitioner at Leaf Architects. And this evening, we're talking about an architect's perspective on what to consider when building your first block of flats. And it really is about small scale developments. And a lot of us, have ambitions of maybe one day being as big as the Baldwin properties. I'm sure you would have seen the news over the weekend with them, unveiling essentially that Mooikloof development that they're going to be building. You would have known that when I spoke to the CEO, Stephen Briggs, right here on the Private Property Podcast, the Sense announcement had just been made about them acquiring that land in Mooikloof. So over the weekend, they of course unveiled it with President Ramaphosa also being there. And I'm sure many of us probably want to be able to build those kinds of developments and at that scale. But it starts somewhere. You certainly do not start with building over 50,000 units. You probably start with building maybe 4 units, 6 units, really small scale development, and then learn your lessons and then go bigger and bigger. And this evening, we'll be looking at the kind of things that an architect would want you to know when you're doing those sort of small scale development. It could be, a block of flats, small block of flats, perhaps in a township, perhaps clusters, in certain suburbs. Really, what are some of the things that you need to be looking out for? And of course, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Hello to everybody. Nice to be back.
Daniel, we were saying, off air that when you think of small scale development, this is really where you cut your teeth if you want to be a developer, right? I mean, we see some of the bigger developers. Bowen is the biggest that we know of. Not everybody is going to necessarily reach that scale. Not everybody even wants to reach that scale. There are so many probably steps before you reach that scale, but there are certain fundamentals that as a developer, you essentially need to get right. And whether you are, a Zamantungwa who just wants to build maybe 6 units, or you're a Baldwin who's going to build many, many units, certain fundamentals are essentially all there. It's just that when Zamantungwa does it, she's doing it at a slightly smaller scale. And I want us to, talk with our listeners a little bit about what some of the things they need to be thinking of when they're building those small scale developments, especially from an architect's perspective. Because we've had you on, you were on last week, and one of the big things with you always say, work with a professional. Don't think you can DIY it yourself unless, of course, you are a professional in the built environment. So that's already one that goes without saying, because I know Daniel will keep repeating it during the course of our conversation, because you cannot think you can do this alone. You shouldn't. In the same way, if you are sick or you need some kind of, surgery, if you need root canal surgery, you're not going to do it yourself. You're going to go to a dentist who's going to do it. So the same certainly does apply with this one. So Daniel, what we then say, is the first thing that viewers at home, you're an investor and now you're thinking, I've been buying units, but now I want to go into, development, or perhaps buying, a house, remodeling it so that it becomes like a cluster. What's that first thing that we need to be thinking of as we are about to walk down that path?
Yes, I think the most important is that you need a roadmap, or let's call it a business plan, a property development business plan, because you need to know step by step how you're going to proceed on this path towards your dream, towards hopefully getting a substantial return on your investment. So the first thing I would say that is critical is the research. You do need to do research about the location. You need to do proper research in terms of who are you going to appeal? Who's your target market? What sort of people are you targeting? Is it students maybe, because it's close to universities or colleges? So what would the target market be, and what type of properties would appeal to that target market? If you're going to do a development in town, maybe, like similar to a Maboneng, or maybe a refurbishment of an old block, usually that would be maybe young professionals. It would be a mix of young professionals with students. If you move more towards the suburbs, it might be for young families or people with children. So those different markets are critical to your location. And location and the market appeal, I think, are synonymous. And I think the other aspect that you really need to look at is, if you're going to do a development, is it that you are going to develop it to let properties out? Or is it that you're going to develop it to sell? Or maybe it's a combination of both. We spoke offline about that sometimes a hybrid approach is better, because you can sell off plan to raise the cash flow, in order then for you to hang on to some properties to allow for that market value to appreciate. So I think that's another important process. And I think the other thing that is critical, of course, is your costs. How do you calculate your return on investment? How do you calculate your rental yield? Well, that is usually a very easy kind of process. It's your sales price minus what you're going to sell it for, minus the costs or your purchase of the land, or the cost of the land, and your building cost, the cost of your professional team. So that is critical, because you don't want to end up running at a loss. You ideally would like to get a fair percentage profit return on your investment. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and Daniel, actually, like one of the things that, because I think you've actually already given us such great insight in terms of some of the things that we need to be thinking about. So that business plan is so important. And I think one of the things we're even saying off air is, oftentimes when people think about having to come up with a business plan, you're thinking maybe it's one of those things, or this roadmap, as you also called it. You're thinking perhaps you're only supposed to be doing it for purposes of communicating what you intend to do to your investors, so that they could obviously put up some of the cash. Perhaps you're also looking to raise funding from institutional funding, so looking at a bank, and so you think, okay, I only need to have this up for those for those partners and to raise this capital. But actually the importance of a business plan goes far beyond the you wanting to raise capital from it, which of course is important, and everybody you want to ask for money, even if you're saying I just need 50,000 rands is going to go towards this development that I've got, I'll want to see the numbers. I think though, as a small scale developer, we ourselves need to sit down and create that roadmap and see how we are, intending to essentially make the money, how much we're actually intending to sell, what are the margins going to be? Because it's so easy to just, see perhaps whether it's a piece of land, or sometimes there's already some kind of structure there. You're thinking, I'll be able to refurbish this. It's in the inner city. You're already thinking there's foot traffic. I'm going to make money, without having a fundamental understanding of, the target market, as you were saying, and just the general market research of that space. So I think one of the big things is how important it is for us as small scale developers to be able to do that exercise for ourselves. Because sometimes you'll find, before you even go raise the money, as you're doing that, you realize actually maybe this particular deal is not that great, or this particular area doesn't quite work, because you're already doing the work and the research and realizing that, nope, this isn't it. Maybe let's find another area where the returns might actually be better. So I actually really like that one, because it also does help you, because by the time you're deciding, am I buying, to sell, am I buying to rent, am I going to use a hybrid model? By then you should have done that first aspect of, fundamentally understanding the numbers, fundamentally understanding the returns, so that when you make a decision about whether you're buying to let, or you're going to build to let, or renovate to let, or renovate or build to sell, you know what the numbers are going to look like. So, because I think sometimes we jump to the, I want to build and rent out my place, or I want to build and sell the place, without having a very fundamental understanding of some of those basics. So I really love what you've just touched on there, Daniel, because I think it is one of those things that so many of us at home could probably miss so easily. And I know that one of the big things, Daniel, that you often talk about, of course, is working with a professional. And we're saying, off air, that one of the big things is this idea of staying on schedule. So the timing and staying on schedule. Perhaps take us through, the importance of what that essentially means, especially when it relates to working with that professional.
Yes, well, there's an old saying, time is money. And if you are going to say you're going to purchase the land, now you want to develop, then you want to sell, or you want to let, that time period from the moment that you purchase the land or purchase the property to the moment that you start getting an income generated can be substantial. You don't want to have any unnecessary delays. So either you're going to appoint a project manager who can run it for you on a tight line. You have to stay on schedule. You cannot have delays. So to have a professional team, to have a proper architect, a proper designer, a design professional, and or a project manager, you have to get your tentative costs sorted out. So you need some kind of quantity surveyor, some kind of cost estimates, even if it's initial costs that you can obtain from a builder via your professional team. But you need to know, is this feasible? Because that brings me back again to my issue about how important research is. For example, I had the other day a lady who came to me, she wanted to do a similar kind of development. I said, the first thing that you need to do is do some research. What is the ceiling of properties? What are the average selling prices of properties in your area? There's no point if properties sell for 2 million, 3 million, you want to do something for 5 or 6 million. Or rentals. What is the typical kind of rentals that you can expect in your area? So do that kind of research, but you do not overcapitalize. So that is the first, that research aspect is critical. Getting your timing is, you have to stay on schedule. You cannot have delays because something unexpected cropped up. So I think it might be worth your while to get a property manager or get a professional team involved. Excuse me. The last thing that I want to say is that often if you're going to renovate a space, there might be unexpected aspects. For example, a lot of people have made a lot of money who have bought an old, more derelict home, a property that needed fixing up. They want to add on to it. They want to maybe develop other units around it, or they just want to develop a property, fix it, renovate it, and sell it. Then you need to prioritize. You need to know, again, in terms of your research, as I said before, what is your business plan? What is your target market? What is your expected return on investments? And what is the ceilings that you can expect? So I think that is very important to calculate those initial. So it's important that you do your research, that you don't rush into things, but that you consider all aspects. It's a bit like, as I said earlier on, when you're planning to travel somewhere, you plan your route, you know where you're going to go, you know how to get to your destination. And I think that is very important when you do a property development as well.
Daniel, we're going to go for a quick break. And when we come back, I actually also want us to look on the finance side and the numbers side, because that's also something that I know so many of us probably either underestimate. I often talk about the pressure and the pressure points of building. And I think sometimes at home, we probably don't quite understand what goes into the full spectrum of financing and what goes into that. And of course, to our viewers at home, I certainly want to hear from you. If you attended firstly the virtual property show, how did you find it? What were some of the great sessions that you attended? And what were some of the lessons that you learned from the virtual property show? And of course, if you're a property investor who wants to be a small scale developer or already doing small scale developments, what would be some useful tips that you'd like to share with the rest of the community? I think we love learning from other people who've walked the path. There's actually an isiZulu idiom that says indlela ibuzwa abaphambili, which essentially means you ask for the way. I mean, the direct translation is essentially you ask the way from those who've walked the path and who are ahead. So we certainly do want to hear from you at home if you have done a small scale development, and there are certain things that came up that you were not aware of prior to starting that development that you've now learned, and that the next time you do it, you're certainly not going to make some of those mistakes. We're going to go for a quick break and we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 120 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. This evening, we're looking at an architect's perspective on what to consider when building your first block of flats. And I'm joined by Daniel van der Merwe, who's a director and practitioner at Leaf Architects. And before the break, we've covered some of the things that you certainly need to be considering. Some of them are just prior to even starting your small scale development. And that's, of course, firstly, just having a business plan. It's a really great roadmap that helps you navigate, understanding what are some of the cost implications of perhaps what you're about to be building, some of the margins. So if you're going to, certainly buy to, let's say, rent, or you're going to buy to sell, understanding what the various price points are. And that's something that you would essentially have in your particular business plan. And another thing, of course, is then deciding if you're going to, be building or renovating in order to sell or to rent, or if you're going to use a hybrid model. Because we've seen that with some small scale developers, suppose you are going to be building 6 units, you might need to sell the first 2 for purposes of cash flow, and then only after maybe keep the other 4 because you're thinking of capital appreciation, and you might perhaps sell them off at a later stage, or you want to keep renting them out because the cash flow from those units is going to be quite good. And I think the other nice thing is you might even do a nice property management company where you literally bill yourself for those 4 units, and of course the 2 that you've sold, and now you have a nice income stream of from those properties as well. And of course the big thing Daniel also mentioned to us is to do our market research. I think so many people, you almost excitedly go head in. And this afternoon I was driving in a new area, I saw new developments kind of being built, and a part of me was like, this is actually a great spot. I could easily be like, okay, let me also get something in that same area, because that there are all these amenities, schools, malls, it's within the good traffic nodes. but then you might just find that there isn't more space to be building more. So really understanding your market research is so crucial. But Daniel, so one of the things I want us to look at when we look at, the financing part, perhaps take us through the kind of financing that small scale developer would need to even raise, because obviously you have to pay even the workers, the professionals that you'd be working with, and perhaps some of the ways that you've seen, small scale developers potentially raise the money, because sometimes you don't find the full amount, for example, from just your bank. So they find different creative ways of making sure that they raise the capital that's needed for that project to be concluded.
Yes, I just want to emphasize again, I think cash flow is critical. You need cash flow, so you need to have the money, you need to be able to pay the builders, you need to be able to raise all those kind of finances. So I think it's also times have taught us to think outside of the box, to think more entrepreneurial and more creative about issues. And I would like to suggest that people consider alternative ways of funding. For example, if you've got other people on board, maybe it's somebody who's got a stand already, somebody who is a builder or even part of a professional team, maybe to do a joint venture, maybe to invite them to become part of your team, part of you. You start your own little small circle of investors. It's not just about you, but other people come on. It's almost like a bartering kind of system where you bring people on and each contributes his skills in exchange for a certain percentage of the return. So that's one way where you can limit your risk and actually the costs of getting people involved by making them part of your investment team. So that is one option. Very often you would see people go out, they see a derelict home, they go, they knock on the door, they discuss it with the property owner and say, this is our idea, would you be prepared to come on board? So that goes away from the traditional model of going to the bank, which I think is, of course, an important and vital component, the traditional form of finance. But for example, there's a big shortage of housing, and you might go and approach the Department of Housing to see if there's a possibility of a partnership. Is there a way that you could get NGOs involved? Is there other ways, other organizations who are in the housing or in the property field that you might bring in as partners in this development? You were talking about the Mooikloof development, and that is a perfect example of a public-private partnership which works.
And I think, one of the big things that we're certainly seeing, Daniel, right now is the ability to find those different partners. So sometimes it may not necessarily be government, and certainly government at that scale. I mean, you saw the Department of Human Settlements. I think infrastructure development was also there. So it may not necessarily be at that big scale, but certainly being able to work with various partners on a particular development, even if it's a small scale development, because I think sometimes as property investors, especially when you're still, let's say, relatively small and you don't have a lot of deals under your belt, you think that partnerships only once you get very big. So you sort of underestimate that forming those partnerships and being able to work with people can also be with developments that are your 6 units, your 10 units. It doesn't have to be a 500 unit development. Only then do you start bringing in partners to make that deal work. So it's so important, I think, for us as investors, that we understand the importance when we say networking, that you also network with your peers, because oftentimes the idea of networking is often with networking with people who are, we'll say, higher up than you, or who have more than you, or perhaps their property portfolios are 5-10 times the size of your portfolio. But in effect, you're able to network and collaborate and work with other property investors who are literally at the same level as you are. There's still quite a lot of value that you each respectively bring to that deal. And it's something that, Daniel, I'm sure you've probably seen that some property investors probably don't realize the the importance of that, and that they can essentially also work with their peers. You don't have to try and work for or work with or collaborate with some of the bigger developers.
Correct. It's about collaboration, really. And I think you made a very valid point there that it could even be family members, it could be existing property owners. So yeah, think outside of the box, in other words. Think of all possible ways of how you can make this project happen. And of course, maybe it's a hybrid. It's a combination of banking finance. It's a combination of looking at assistance through various kind of governmental organizations, or, as you said, from your peers. I just want to make another important point, and that is that what I notice with a lot of clients, what they do is that they become quite subjective in the whole process. Be it when you're renovating or when you're going to do a property development, small-scale property development from scratch. It is not about your likes. It's not about the way you want to see it. You have to put you in the eyes of your target market.
Yeah.
Now, remember, we said research is important. What is your target market? What sort of properties will appeal to that target market? So maybe it could be a good idea to run it past that. You know, the way that they do TV shows, they get a target audience and they get feedback from them. So ask if it's going to be students, would this property work for them? It's not what you think is going to work. It's not what your likes is about. So don't become subjective. Stay objective about the fact that you are just a facilitator in the process.
Mm-hmm. And it's such an important one, Daniel, that I think we probably, as you're saying, certainly do underestimate. We are, of course, taking your questions and comments at home. And I see a question from Bongani Mabunda. I think I actually saw you, Bongani, attending the virtual property show over the weekend. And Daniel, Bongani asks, can a private-public partnership work if you're a government employee property investor?
Sure, that is a tricky question in many ways, because I think government generally frowns upon if their own people sort of access funding, because everything has become tainted with corruption and kind of, I think it's a tricky one. But I'm sure, for example, I know that people, for example, working at a bank get preferential rates. Interest rates. So maybe it is depending on which government department you're working for and what role you play, and can you separate work from your kind of pursuits,
That's also what I've seen, Dan. I mean, I've certainly seen, for example, let's say teachers and nurses who are able to pursue their property ambitions and have been able to work with other partners in their property ambitions and property businesses, and that isn't something that's necessarily wrong. If anything, it doesn't even affect the nature of their day-to-day job. It's not something that's parallel or similar to even the job that they're doing. Perhaps it might be an issue, and I'm only speculating on this one, if let's say you work for Public Works or Department of Human Settlements and you have insider information, as it were, around, let's say, certain land that was going to be available or something that's going to be built, and then you pursue something. So there might be a potential conflict, but I think, government employees in their entirety, I've certainly seen some who have property businesses and have done these small scale developments where they've been able to work with other partners and build, whether it's block of flats or clusters in different areas or even townships. So there hasn't been an issue, but as we're saying, the moment it then becomes a private-public partnership, then it probably also depends on which department you're trying to work with, the scale of the development, and was it one of those things that had to go out for tender? So I think it's probably a case-by-case basis, or it also depends the nature of where in government you are essentially working. But Daniel, I mean, I cannot let you go without asking you, what are some mistakes that you can already share with us that we should try and avoid when we're doing these small scale developments? Because I'm sure you've worked with, clients and you've seen some of them making some of these mistakes. And as always, mistakes are either costing us time or they're always certainly costing us money. What are the key mistakes that we should try to avoid altogether when we're looking at small scale development?
Okay, so again, I think it's about timing. Don't rush into it. Do your homework properly. Do your research. Take your time. Cross your T's, dot your I's. And once you start your development, it's again about timing. You have to stick to your timeline. You cannot change your timing schedule. You cannot cause delays. In other words, you've got to have all your ducks in a row, as they say, before you start, so that the process from the moment that you get involved, the moment that construction starts, the moment that the physical development happens, that there are no unnecessary delays, that there are no unexpected hidden costs or any nasty surprises creeping up. So that to me is crucial. That, and of course, your source of financing, because you do need cash flow. You don't want to end up halfway through a process and something causes a delay, because time is money.
Yeah. Daniel, I'm going to leave it there. I think the very big thing, and I even wrote it down here, cash flow is critical. We often talk about how cash is king. I would say cash is queen. So understanding that your cash flow is crucial as a small scale developer is so important. I've seen so many small scale developments halt, mid construction because cash flow was affected. Either they didn't do their calculations properly enough, or they didn't, space the construction adequately enough. And you find that they run out of money, or they can't pay workers, they can't buy the material. So you really want to understand when money is coming in, where it's coming from. Do you need to sell something off plan in order for you to finish your development? Do you have sufficient funds to be able to finish all of it? Understand that, and then you'll probably have a relatively successful building process, which already is stressful enough as it is. But as Daniel said, cash flow is critical, so do make sure that you understand that aspect. Daniel, as usual, thank you so much for joining us this evening on the Private Property Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And that is Daniel van der Merwe, who is a director and a practitioner at Leaf Architects. And that, of course, brings us to the end of the Monday edition of the Private Property Podcast. It has been a pleasure being with you, especially after the weekend where we had the virtual property show. I want to hear from you on social media. What have been some key, sessions that you attended over the weekend? Who are some of the guests that you probably want us to even bring on the, on the Private Property Podcast? Because I know some of the guests that were on the program we've had before. Who are some of the ones that you definitely want us to either have again, or there's something they mentioned, during that talk, and now you've had time to think about it and rethink about it, and you're like, you know what? Have them back on here so that we can ask them more questions, and we're really able to, pick their brains a bit more on some of the topics that they covered in their session on the virtual property show. Well, ladies and gents, it has been a pleasure being with you this evening. And of course, we're back again tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. And I do look forward to your comments and, your tweets and your messages on YouTube and Facebook. Until tomorrow evening, hoping as usual that you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Alan Footman. I'm a sports tour operator from Cape Town. My family and I have been living in the southern suburbs for 21 years. What we love about the neighborhood is it's very family orientated. Lots of things for the kids to do, especially here where we are next to the farm, where folk can walk the dog, go for runs and enjoy the fresh air. In the southern suburbs, we're lucky enough to have some of the top schools in the country, and on top of that we have the University of Cape Town, one of the most famous universities in the world. Newlands is a great suburb, all the sporting amenities, Newlands rugby ground, cricket ground, etc. Down the road at Claremont, lots of shopping centres for the kids and for the mothers to do their shopping. Fantastic pubs and restaurants around like Forries, Springbok Bar. Bishop's Court is full of beautiful upmarket homes. Kirstenbosch Gardens, National Botanical Gardens right next door. What attracted us to Constantia is the large open spaces. I've always wanted to be a farmer, and now I'm living next to Constantia Wine Estate, the oldest wine farm in the country, where you have fantastic wines, great restaurants, got the best of both worlds. My family and I have loved every moment of living in Constantia. We couldn't be happier, and this is our neighborhood.